Welcome back, my friends. Jake here. Today's video, we're going to do another question and answer. Once a month on the community tab of my YouTube channel, I'll put out a question prompt such as this one. In the comments section, you can ask me anything about anything, then read each other's questions and thumbs up the questions you want me to respond to in a video. It was pretty competitive. The cutoff was 40 thumbs up. Thank you to everyone who left a question and thumbs up other people's replies. I'm going to try and get to as many as I can in 30 minutes. So the most liked question was from David, and here's his question. It's a good one. What are the odds for Ukraine helping out Moldova, evicting the Russians from Transnistria? Because although it's only a small contingency of Russian forces, it still requires Ukraine to guard their borders with Moldova. And if Sandu gives Zelensky the green light for such a raid on Transnistria, it would rid both Moldova and Ukraine of one less thing to worry about. Yes, on paper, this makes sense for Ukraine to just knock off these Russian forces in Transnistria. If I was playing a video game, I would immediately do this. Unfortunately, in the real world, there are complications, and I can give you an example. So the population of Moldova is 2.6 million people, and the population of Transnistria, which is recognized and supported by Russia, is 470,000 people. Now, how many Russian soldiers are in this breakaway province? And according to Google, it's about 2,000 Russian soldiers. But Transnistria still has its own military forces acting in support of the Russian peacekeepers. So how many thousands of Transnistrians are working with the Russian military? And I'm not sure on that one, but it could be in the tens of thousands. And this breakaway border region between Ukraine and Moldova, I think if Ukraine really wanted to, they could knock off the forces in this region probably within a week. I think Ukraine's military is capable enough where they could easily defeat the Russians in this region. To the best of my knowledge, the Russian forces in Transnistria are trapped there. It's a landlocked territory. Nobody is getting in, nobody's getting out, nobody's being resupplied. So if Ukraine wanted to apply pressure, they could easily win. That's not the problem. The problem, there's many, but I'll give you one. How many Ukrainian refugees are currently in Moldova? It's about 100,000. So, if Ukraine started pushing on Transnistria, how many residents of Transnistria would flee and probably just go into Moldova? They can't go into Ukraine. It could be tens of thousands, if not maybe hundreds of thousands, if active fighting started occurring. Moldova isn't a very wealthy country. Its government is not very sturdy, and they're already hosting tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. Add into the mix refugees from Transnistria. I don't think the government of Moldova thinks they can even handle that. There also probably would be domestic strife, internal conflict. Would the angered residents of Transnistria then resort to violence, potentially targeting Ukrainian refugees in Moldova? We don't really want civilians attacking other civilians. So I think the way that Ukraine views it as the Russians really aren't doing anything. They're not attacking Ukraine from Transnistria. And if the Russians in the east can be defeated, if the Russian government collapses, then all these guys are probably going to have to disarm themselves and then get on a bus to go back to Russia. So I think the governments of Ukraine and Moldova have already made the decision to do nothing, because if Ukraine can be victorious in the east, that's pretty much a death blow for Transnistria anyways. If the Russian government can't even pay their own soldiers, they're not going to be able to pay to continue propping up the fake government of this border region. So that's my thoughts why Transnistria has never been dealt with, but they're not going to last much longer after this war is over. Next question is from Chris, 142 likes. What are some of the reasons US politicians give to justify their opposition to helping Ukraine? I don't understand how anyone can turn a blind eye to Russia's aggression, genocide, and war crimes. So the reasons that some American politicians give publicly, I don't believe those are the real reasons. That's just what they're going to say. So they're going to talk about the national debt. They're going to talk about fiscal constraints here in the United States. Let Europe's problems be Europe's problems. America should focus on America. That's what they'll say. But the real reason why about 50 House Republicans, in the House of Representatives, there's, I think, 230 House Republicans. About 50 of them don't like Ukraine and kind of like Russia. In the Senate, maybe 15 Republican senators. Why is this? And the reason, and I don't want to get too political here, is we don't really have a two-party system anymore. We have the Democratic Party and the best they can do, and then we have the Trump Party. In my opinion, in 2016, Donald Trump killed what was left of the Bush-Reagan Republican Party, and the party now belongs to him, and whatever position he wants to hold. To win a primary and get elected to Congress as a Republican, you need the endorsement and support of Donald Trump. He is the leader of the party. Whether you love him or hate him, I think this is still an indisputable fact, even though he did not win re-election in 2020. So the dislike towards Ukraine from some Republicans goes all the way back to Trump's first impeachment. And if you don't remember what Trump did, the inquiry reported that Trump withheld military aid and an invitation to the White House from President Zelensky in order to influence Ukraine to announce an investigation of Joe Biden. So in 2016, Trump defeated Hillary Clinton, but in 2020, it was looking like Joe Biden was going to run for president. So what Trump wanted, and there's a recorded phone conversation, this is what Lieutenant Colonel Vindman was doing. He was a translator on that call. And Trump was pressuring Zelensky to open a domestic investigation into Joe Biden and Joe Biden's son because he wanted this aura of corruption to influence the election. And Trump was saying, you can't come to the White House. We're going to delay military aid unless you announce an investigation of my political opponent. This is what got Trump impeached. Now, just because he was impeached doesn't mean he was removed from office. The Senate had a trial. The Senate voted not to remove him as president of the United States. But this is why some Republicans don't like Ukraine. There also just is a bizarrely high number of links between Russian operatives and Trump, the Trump campaign and Trump associates. There's never been an American politician in American history with more connections and ties to Russia than Donald Trump. Now, am I saying that Donald Trump is a Russian asset? No, but it's bizarre why there are so many people working for Trump who have previously worked for various Russians. And the highest profile individual is probably Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was Trump's campaign manager in 2016. And Paul Manafort was the lobbyist who advised and guided Viktor Yanukovych. Viktor Yanukovych was Russia's preferred Ukrainian president. This is the guy during the Maidan Revolution that shot all the protesters and then fled the country because he's a criminal. So yeah, that's bizarre. But the thing about Trump is he doesn't really... Here's the thing. When Putin initially invaded Ukraine, Donald Trump was caught on camera saying this was a genius move and very savvy of Putin to launch a full-scale invasion and take the capital city of Kyiv within 2 weeks, regain the country, and absorb it back into Russia. That's what all the intelligence was telling Trump, that Ukraine wasn't going to last longer than 2 weeks, that this was going to be a bloodbath, and Russia was going to decisively win. Well, that was a year and a half ago, and Russia's not doing that well. And Trump, as a political operative, he doesn't like losing, he doesn't like losers. So the worse Putin does, and the worse the Russians do, the less Trump wants to be associated with it. So ironically, the fact that Ukraine has been doing so well, Trump doesn't want to say anything bad about Ukraine anymore, and he doesn't want to say anything good about the Russians anymore. What he's been saying in the media recently is kind of bizarre, claiming that he could end the war within 24 hours. He just needs to be elected president first. I know there are people who watch my channel that support Donald Trump and are planning to vote for him in 2024. It is what it is. Let's just be honest. Everyone in America has already made up their minds. They're either for or against him after the 2016 and the 2020 election cycles. So nobody's going to change their mind voting again in 2024. But I think, once again, if Ukraine goes on the counteroffensive and performs well, honestly, by 2024, Trump could be saying he's always supported Ukraine and he's never supported the Russians, and he wants to give as much aid to Ukraine as possible. If that were to happen, House Republicans would just do whatever Donald Trump wants. Just my opinion. Take it or leave it. Next question is from Julian. Jake, do you think Russia is close to hyperinflation? And if so, do you think economically that there is any return from that? I have seen you talk about in previous videos the economic war being waged against Russia, probably with a goal of bringing down the regime from within. So Russia's currency actually strengthened last summer when oil prices were at $120 a barrel. But since last summer, the Russian currency is devalued by 52%. So when we zoom out, it's a little bit where it was in 2021, but it's on a clear upward trajectory of the ruble devaluing. Now, the ruble is not really an internationally traded currency. No country in the world right now is holding large reserves of rubles because nobody has faith in the Russian currency. So it's very easy for the Russian government and the Russian central bank to buy their own currency, to manipulate the prices, but they can't do that forever. And the Russian government is already running monthly deficits. They're spending more money than they're bringing in tax revenue and energy export revenue. So this is going to just keep getting worse, and hyperinflation would mean exponential devaluation. We'll get there, I think, once more of Russia's government institutions start failing. That'll occur when they can't pay their people anymore, or they just start, making the money printer go brr in order to start paying their security forces. Russia's got serious problems, and they're never going to get better until they find a way out of this war. If you want more anecdotal stories of how bad is inflation in Russia, I can recommend the channel Niki Proshin. He's originally from St. Petersburg, but he fled Russia to avoid being mobilized. And he's got a price comparison video from 2 years ago at a supermarket to today at a supermarket. And he has the receipts, he has the prices with basic staples, like bread and fruit, going up in price 50%, 90%, 100, 200% in the last 2 years. I don't know how the average Russian can tolerate those price increases of basic staples as their wages probably aren't keeping up with 90% inflation over 2 years. I'll link the video down below. Next question is from Jessica. Do you have any fun hobbies? I know making these videos is time-consuming and sometimes heartbreaking work, so I hope you have something fun to do that brings you joy. Supplemental, have you read any good books lately? So my primary hobby the last decade has been Magic the Gathering. For anyone that knows this game, I think it's the most interesting, engaging, and challenging tabletop game you can participate in. I love all kinds of card games and board games, but Magic the Gathering, as soon as I discovered it, I've been hooked since the original Return to Ravnica block. Once again, for any players out there, let's just geek out for a second, but I'm primarily a green player. Green paired up with any other color. So green-red is Gruul, green-black is Golgari, green-white is Selesnya, but I don't play blue. I kind of hate blue players. People who just sit on counter spells and draw cards until the other player has nothing left, and then they win the game with their one creature or one planeswalker. So, no, I don't like blue players. I also play Fortnite, not competitively, but it's, in my opinion, a very relaxing game that I picked up about 4 years ago when I was in the military. So on my PS4, occasionally I will enjoy a couple games of, what's it called? The 100-man elimination. What's the name of that movie? Battle Royale, that's it. As far as books I've read recently, last month I finished Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a how to develop good habits and how to end bad habits. Fantastic book. I highly recommend it. You won't regret reading this book if you pick it up. The book I'm currently reading is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And I was probably supposed to read this book first because James Clear references this book in that book, which is why I then bought this book and am reading it now. Also a very good book. Let's go to the next question. Fearless Vid 1, how are you doing? You've been covering the war in Ukraine for a while now, but I know that doing this can't be easy. I hope you are doing well in these odd times we live in. Thank you for everything you do to keep us informed. I'm doing good. I'm actually releasing this video this weekend because I've flown back to Milwaukee to visit my father. It's his 70th birthday, and he owns a 1972 VW bus. He paid to have it professionally restored, but he has owned this vehicle for over 50 years. And he goes to classic car shows. So anytime in the Milwaukee or Wisconsin area there's a car show, he'll show up and let people check out his van. I also bought Packers tickets. My dad and I will go to an NFL game every year, and we're trying to hit different stadiums. And this year, I'm from Wisconsin originally, the Green Bay Packers are actually playing the Las Vegas Raiders. So I live in Las Vegas. An NFC team is on the road to Las Vegas to play. It was just too perfect. So this weekend I bought 2 tickets for the October 9th Monday night game. A lot of fun. I also recently had my best friends from college come and visit me here in Vegas. We did the usual, like Vegas shows and the buffet, and they did a little gambling. I'm not really a gambler. But we had a lot of fun, and we might start making this like an annual meetup. As long as I'm living in Vegas, people like flying out here and doing fun stuff. Oh, why do we all have our arms spread this way? And this is a reference to a British comedian, Eddie Izzard. He talked about Jesus in the Last Supper doing the big arms thing. So me and my friends from college for the last 20 years have had this inside joke about doing the big arms thing when taking pictures together. So if you've never seen an Eddie Izzard stand-up special, I highly recommend them. Next question from David. Okay, here's one for Jake Bro, U.S. Air Force veteran with expertise in nuclear deterrence. Let's say the Russian Federation is coming apart and breakaway republics are starting to coalesce. What will be the best course for NATO to pursue for stabilizing the situation and the stockpile of nuclear weapons? We're talking about 6,000 nukes here, of all shapes and sizes. What results should NATO push for if there is no longer a single country called Russia? So if the central government in Russia can't control the breakaway provinces and the breakaway provinces have nukes, they can't keep them. The other nuclear powers are going to have to strike up deals with these regions to get the nukes away from them. Maybe some of them could keep a limited number, but not hundreds or thousands. So I think money's going to be involved, humanitarian aid. Everything is going to come with conditions that they give up these nuclear weapons. And if you're not familiar with an incident from 1994, I highly recommend reading about Project Sapphire. Project Sapphire was a covert operation from the United States government into Kazakhstan to secure enriched uranium. So basically, the government of Kazakhstan, this is like a year or two after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan found a warehouse full of 600 kilograms of enriched uranium, and they couldn't get a hold of the Russians. In those first couple years with Boris Yeltsin, things were a little dicey in Russia, so they contacted the Americans, and the Americans also couldn't really get a hold of the Russians because they wanted Russia to, drive to Kazakhstan and pick up this enriched uranium. So with Moscow being non-responsive, the United States said, we can't just let this fissile material sit in this warehouse. So they sent in, you can read about it, but they sent in the military to go secure it. Didn't ask the Russians permission. The Kazakh government knew about it, but I think a similar series of events is going to have to occur. If Russia collapses, the other nuclear powers, the United Kingdom, France, the United States, China's going to have to help. If we have to, militaries are going to have to go into these territories and secure the nuclear weapons, secure the enriched uranium. Nobody likes this idea. Nobody wants to do this. But for global security, it might be necessary if the government in Moscow stops answering the phone. Next question. Do you think if a civil war breaks out in Russia, Russia falls apart? In my opinion, there's no scenario where the Russian Federation, 100% remains in its current form. I think some of the provinces, at least, are going to break away and try and declare their independence. In a perfect world, the government in Moscow agrees to this peacefully, but yeah, that's probably not going to happen. Ideally, I would like to see Russia broken up into chunks of countries between 10 and 20 million people, just to prevent the concentration of power. This cycle of Russia collapsing and then rebuilding itself by expanding across the horde lands, they've been doing this for 600 years. It's getting boring. Let's try something different. Let's prevent the concentration of power in Moscow, which is the continuous cause of all these wars. And it's okay. It's okay if the Russian Federation breaks up and all of these countries still speak Russian. There are 21 countries that all speak Spanish in the world. the remnants of the Spanish Empire. Doesn't mean they all have to be the same country. Same is true with Arabic. Just because you speak the same language doesn't mean you have to be the same country. Same is true with English. These are the remnants of the British Empire, and all of these new countries will be the remnants of the Russian Empire. Imperialism needs to end. Next question, do you think that if a rebel group in Russia manages to get a hold of a good chunk of territory and asks the world for recognition, that the world is going to recognize them and or support them? So support them, yes. I think Western governments will have no problems supplying money and weapons to rebel groups. But as far as recognizing them as a new country, there's got to be an international process to allow that. Governments are very dicey about recognizing a new group as being its own sovereign nation. And the reason why is there are lots of countries with ethnic minorities that want to break away, form their own countries. So collectively, the entire world doesn't like this idea. And I think the ethnic group that is the largest in the world without their own country are the Kurds. So the Kurds take up a good chunk of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and even Armenia. And they don't have their own country. So anytime there's a problem in one of these countries, they'll get support all day long. But who has actually taken the time to recognize them as being sovereign or having their own nation? And governments aren't going to go there. But if there's a civil war and there's fighting, and another country can go to Moscow and talk to them and get them to agree to recognize the independence of Dagestan or Tula or Chechnya or whatever, then yes, I think, well, Russia has to be included. Whatever government remains in Moscow, they're also going to have to agree to it before the international community would recognize a new country being created. Next question, do you think Ukraine's total victory, including Crimea, is essential to stop China from invading Taiwan, to show Xi what happens when you bully your neighbors? If it happens anyway, do you think American citizens will be drafted to fight on Taiwan's side? That's a complicated question. So let's address the second part about Americans being drafted. And China would have to directly attack the United States, I think, in order for there to be a mass mobilization for war. I don't think if China tried to invade Taiwan, yeah, I think they would maybe destroy some ships and shoot down some planes with American service members, but I don't think China wants to attack Hawaii or Guam or any other U.S. territory. So unless China attacks U.S. territory, I don't think there will be a draft. As far as attacking Taiwan, I don't think China's going to do it. I think China wants to talk about doing it because perhaps they can get concessions from the United States or the rest of the world, but I think it also helps President Xi draw support from nationalist fervor, but I dispute China's or the Communist Party's claim to the island. So in 1949, China had a civil war. The Russians were backing the communists, and I guess the United States was backing the nationalists, but Harry Truman in 1949 was distracted and didn't do a very good job. So Mao Zedong and the communists took over the mainland, and all of the nationalists retreated to the island of Taiwan. The communists had no boats, they had no way of taking the island, and so Taiwan has been this independent province of the Chinese people for 70 years. But it wasn't even really a Chinese territory prior to 1949 or 1945. Japan had already colonized this island as part of their empire going back to 1895. So it's this weird dynamic where Japan controlled it for 50 years. It was under the national government for 4 years before their civil war, and it's remained this completely autonomous province for 70 years. Where I'm going with this is the communists have never controlled it. So they can't say they want back what's theirs when it's never been theirs. I'm actually in agreement with Peter Zion. I've watched his YouTube videos and read his books, and he's made a pretty compelling argument that China is facing a demographic crisis. So here are all the Chinese people in their 50s, 54 to 59. And within a decade, all these Chinese people are going to want to retire, stop working, and then draw from the system, healthcare and pension and benefits. And there's not enough young people to support the hundreds of millions of Chinese people who are too old to work anymore. China had this 40-year period of insane growth, benefiting from the one-child policy, fewer children to care for, more time for parents to work. But in a way they cheated, and time is catching up to them. They don't have enough young people to support their aging population, and China's currency and economy is more manipulated than the United States by like a factor of 10. Every criticism that people have about the United States currency or the United States economy or our debt levels, it's way worse in China. All of their factors are worse. So I'm hoping that internal strife and internal problems within China will distract them and they'll never get their act together to actually launch an invasion of Taiwan, but President Biden has reaffirmed security guarantees to the Taiwanese people that if Taiwan is attacked, the United States military will respond to defend them. Related to Ukraine, yes, I also think if Russia and Putin is defeated, that'll help the Chinese communists think twice about attacking Taiwan. Do you think Ukraine will be a member of NATO after the war, or will it be open door like 10 recent years? Does NATO need Ukraine's army just like Ukraine needs NATO membership? 100% Ukraine will be joining NATO. This is non-negotiable. And the reason why is Ukraine's natural resources. So in, I think, 2012, a survey was done, and Ukraine has a lot of oil and natural gas. And shocker, it's off the coast of Crimea and primarily in the Donbass region. This is why Russia was so interested in attacking Ukraine. Lots of reasons why, but if one of the super majors, Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, can partner with the government of Ukraine, they'll invest billions into the country, building the infrastructure to get this oil and natural gas out. And if they do that, they can supply the EU with the natural gas they're no longer getting from Russia. But the super majors, the oil and gas companies, they're not going to partner with Ukraine. They're not going to invest billions if Russia is just going to attack Ukraine again and then destroy that infrastructure. So Russia had the ability to keep Ukraine out of NATO forever. That was never a reason why they attacked them. But now Ukraine has to join NATO. Otherwise, they'll never get foreign investment. They'll never be allowed to rebuild unless there are security guarantees given for outside investment. So I think it's non-negotiable. Within 3 or 4 years, Ukraine will be a full member of NATO, full stop. Next question. I'm Bulgarian and hope that Russia will be demolished to the ground. This is the only way for people from East Europe to have a breath of fresh air. I'd like very much to hear your thoughts on the possible disintegration of Russia, and thank you for your great work. We've already talked about the disintegration of Russia a little bit, but a country that has worse demographics than China is Russia. Echoes of World War II can still be seen in their demographics. They lost so many people. On top of that, not a lot of people were having kids in the 80s and 90s due to economic uncertainty. So there's just not a lot of young people to work jobs and pay taxes and support the Russian military. So Putin knew that the demographics of his country were bad. Once again, rapidly aging population, a lot of women in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s. Look at the discrepancy, 2.5 million Russian women versus only 900,000 Russian men. And there's a fantastic video from Polymatter, What Putin Fears More Than War, 2.4 million views. I'll link it down below. I highly recommend watching it. But Russia has a pension problem in that their state benefits are too generous and not enough workers to support their aging population. So this will compound the problems for Russia and expedite their disintegration. A lot of provinces are probably going to figure it out that they're better off on their own rather than sending the wealth from their natural resources to the aging Russians in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Next question. Thanks for doing this, Jake. Can you tell us how effective the Ukraine combined arms tactics will be in punching through Russian lines and making their way south to cut off the southern Russian land bridge? So how effective will the Ukrainian military be? And nobody knows. Yes, Ukraine experienced a lot of success in the Kharkiv counteroffensive and the Kherson counteroffensive, but Ukraine has had 6 or 7 months of Western training and being supplied Western equipment to prepare for this counteroffensive. I think it's going to happen down here. We don't know how it's going to go, but we can look at how the Russians have performed. Has Russia done anything extraordinary in the last 6 or 7 months to change, adapt, improve? And I don't think so. I think Russia is weaker today than when they got their asses kicked in Kharkiv. That was last September. And they're weaker today than when they got their asses kicked in Kherson. So morale is terrible. Training is terrible. Logistics are terrible. Ukraine doesn't have to be perfect for this to be a rout. Russia just has to be Russia. Russia's ground forces are incompetent. So I'm optimistic, but I do think there's going to be a lot of improvising and adapting on the side of the Ukrainians. And if the Russians can't keep up with that, they're going to fall behind. This just says best coverage of the war on YouTube. Fantastic stuff. No question, but thank you so much, Brandon. What happens in Ukraine? It's going to take many years and billions of dollars to rebuild. How will this affect the global economy? So as far as the global economy, Ukraine's agricultural exports are very important due to Russia's interference in the Black Sea. That's been causing food prices to go higher. But aside from that, the sanctions on Russia are affecting the global economy more than Ukraine being destroyed. And Ukraine is not a very wealthy country. GDP per capita, this is how you can rank how wealthy a nation is. Total wealth divided by their number of people. And Ukraine ranked 112th, below Jamaica and just above Eswatini. And this is actually, in my opinion, a good thing. Ukraine can only go up once it becomes a member of NATO and a member of the EU. There's lots of growth opportunities once foreign investment can come into the country. Lots of EU companies, lots of American or Canadian companies would love to partner with and invest in Ukraine, which will help their local economy. but Ukraine has to shake off their reputation of Russian corruption and get security guarantees before Ukraine's economy can improve. But given that they already started so low, I think they can definitely improve this. I think they can get into the top 50 within the next 10 or 15 years. Ukraine has lots of natural resources and great agricultural land. They just need a better and more functional government free of Russian corruption and interference. Next question. Hi, Jake. Thank you for your heartfelt sharing. I was wondering why war crimes are not being assessed already. Why is it that these monsters are being allowed to continue on with their brutality? I'm not sure what the point of a convention is after what they have done, or conviction. It won't bring those people back. Why does The Hague have to wait until they have done their worst to get started? So I think there's a lot of frustration, but also misunderstanding about the United Nations. The United Nations is not a governing body. It is not a global government force. The United Nations is kind of like an extracurricular activity that countries can participate in if they want to. In the UN Charter, above all, a nation's sovereignty is supreme. The United Nations has no power to do anything, to tell anyone to do anything. Yes, the UN Security Council can pass resolutions that can be binding to allow their members to participate in armed conflict, but that hasn't happened in, when was the last time the UN Security Council approved military action? And I don't have the answer to that. I mean, the Korean War, like, it was a long time ago. So the UN is just a body for government representatives to talk to each other, meet with each other. Some dialogue is better than no dialogue. And as far as The Hague, their jurisdiction only extends to countries willing to participate in it. So with any court system, the crime has to be committed before you can then find somebody guilty. But nobody in Russia is going to be found guilty or tried in the ICC if the government of Russia doesn't allow it. So for FSB officers, Russian generals to eventually be arrested, prosecuted, and put in jail, we're going to need a replacement government in Moscow willing to participate in the ICC. They're going to have to arrest their own people and then hand them over for trial. It's possible. Could happen. I'm hoping it'll happen. And I just want to toss in a quick thought about the United States. If you've never heard of this movie, Team America, World Police, this came out in the late 2000s. It's a comedy full of puppets, but I do think that this parody matched a certain attitude during the Bush administration here in the United States. And the United States doesn't want to be the world police anymore. Since the election of Barack Obama in 2008, continued by Trump, continued by President Biden, we don't want to be America's world police. We're happy to help. We want to do good when we can. But given the devastating outcome of the war in Iraq and, to a lesser extent, the war in Afghanistan, the American people don't want to get involved in the Middle East or in Europe or South America or wherever. So when it comes to the war in Ukraine, I've not explained this in a video, but I've left people comments. President Biden very early on made the decision that he is not the leading force of this coalition to defend Europe. The President of the United States doesn't want to be the leader of Europe's defense. Somebody in Europe has to step up and be the leader of Europe's defense. So the United States is happy to help. President Biden is happy to supply financial aid and military equipment. But if you notice, America's not the first to do anything. Provide tanks, provide jets, provide long-range missiles. Biden is doing this deliberately. He wants France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Poland, whoever, to step up and be their own security guarantors so the United States can shake off this perception of being the world police. Just a closing thought for you. That's all I got time for. I went way over 30 minutes. Thank you so much to everyone who left a question. I will do this again next month. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for supporting me and this channel. It feels incredible. I can't show you enough gratitude for the success that I've been experiencing on YouTube. It's incredible. Till the next video, take care.